All right, this one was fun. Coming up, they had fame, they had the fans, they had it all. Till one decision brought it all crashing down. You loved the first one, so here's part two, counting down the most infamous self-inflicted wounds in rock history. Career-killing choices that left fans stunned, and musicians really on the wrong side of rock history. Some of these are full-on swan dives into disaster. I mean, one rookie hitmaker got taken down by both fans and critics after he boasted that his debut album was better than the greatest album of all time. Can you guess the album and the artist? Another musician was making $30 million a year, but he couldn't figure out his musical identity, and then he spent himself into bankruptcy. He went from an album that sold 18 million copies to one that sold 1,000. That's right, 1,000 copies. Then there was a band who overhyped themselves so much that one fan started a grassroots campaign to destroy him, and it worked. Finally, there was a band that fired a machine gun on stage and then literally burned the equivalent of $1.5 million as a PR stunt. Today, we're sifting through the wreckage to bring you the stories of the dumbest decisions of the rock era. Coming up next on Professor of Rock, brought to you by American Financing. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember Mr. T cereal, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia.
I pity the poor fool, don't eat my cereal.
I love how Pee Wee did that. Make sure to subscribe below right now. I know you'll find Technology in the channel. Click on the white button and click on the bell. Also, check out our podcast on Apple and Spotify. So we did this once before and you loved it, and I got so many requests that we're going to do a part two. Today, we count down the most boneheaded decisions in rock history. And those moments where artists and bands decided to basically just light their career on fire or, straight up jump off a cliff. Here are the top 6 examples of what not to do if you want to make it in the music business. Legendary blunders that taint careers and left all of us fans wondering what the hell were they thinking. All right, at number 6, you're going to be shocked at who I'm including here because they're one of my favorite bands. I'm sure a lot of you love them out there, but bear with me on why they're here. The Alan Parsons Project at number 6. A band that could have been so much bigger, and really the only reason I'm including them on this list is because they made a strategic choice to be a studio band, and so did Steely Dan to a point. But I mean, they had the talent, and they were completely brilliant, but refusing to tour cost them a shot at true rock immortality, let me tell you. They're probably okay with that, really. But I can't help but wonder if the Alan Parsons Project had hit the road with the right front man, we might be talking about them in the same breath as some of the greatest of the 70s, like Pink Floyd. I mean, Alan Parsons was that great. Of course, he engineered the Dark Side of the Moon, so there's that. His connection to Pink Floyd and genius. In the landscape of 70s and 80s rock, obviously live performances were essential for his visibility and longevity. Touring drove record sales, it fueled media exposure, and it helped bands to capitalize on radio play. For the most successful acts of that era, hitting the road was how you built a tribe of loyal fans. However, the Alan Parsons Project made a different choice altogether. They opted to remain a studio-only band, and their decision had real commercial consequences. While groups like Pink Floyd and Rush used elaborate stage shows to secure their global reputations, the Alan Parsons Project stayed out of sight. Okay, here's the deal. The project sold millions of records, but their refusal to tour kept them from becoming a cultural touchstone. These other bands became because of that fan base. At the core of the anti-tour philosophy was vocalist and pianist Eric Woolfson. As the band's co-founder, co-songwriter, and part-time lead vocalist, Woolfson was one of the band's driving engines for sure. He also played keyboards on nearly every track, and he sang lead on a lot of APP's most recognizable hits like Eye in the Sky, In Time, and Don't Answer Me.
Looking at you, I can read your mind. Keeps flowing like a river. Don't answer me.
But here's the thing, he preferred anonymity. And while Alan Parsons also favored the studio, it was Eric's deep resistance to public exposure that closed the door on touring altogether. This stance became even more problematic, when the rise of MTV happened in the early 80s. I mean, suddenly music needed to be visual for everybody. Many MTV videos of the time relied heavily on footage of bands performing live or being in the video. APP simply wasn't built for that format. But the Alan Parsons Project had no clear frontman and no charismatic figure to film, so the band didn't really capitalize on MTV's reach and really couldn't. It left them invisible to an entire generation glued to the screen. The project's sound wasn't incompatible with visual storytelling at all, though. Far from it. Their music was more cinematic than most bands out there, and they even tried their hand at an animated music video, Don't Answer Me, but it just wasn't enough. The band lacked a consistent visual presence, and without tours to fill that gap, they faded from the cultural foreground by the mid-'80s. I think they could have been so much bigger. Eric Wolfson's reclusive personality, while critical to the creative integrity of Alan Parsons Project, also made it difficult to adjust to the promotional demands of the 80s, let's be honest. His desire to remain private kept him away from interviews and performances and public appearances. I mean, these were vital for the band to get out there. This wasn't rock star burnout, though. It was an intentional lifestyle choice for him. Wolfson saw the Alan Parsons Project as a vehicle for ideas and sound, not for celebrity. Had the band embraced touring even briefly, especially in the late 70s when albums like I, Robot and The Turn of a Friendly Car were gaining traction and were so great being played everywhere, they could have expanded their fan base dramatically. Now, when Parsons launched the Alan Parsons Live project in the 90s without Wolfson, the shows drew crowds and praise, and it proved that there was always demand for the material. But by the time Alan Parsons took the music to the stage, the MTV boom was long gone and the band's peak momentum had passed. But still, the response to those later live shows revealed what could have been truly. With strategic touring and stronger video presence, the Alan Parsons Project might have seen an 80s explosion. Instead, they remained a respected but semi-detached presence in rock history. Truly brilliant, but truly distant. And it's so sad because they're amazing. I love Alan Parsons.
Give people play, you take it or you leave it.
Okay, our number 5 pick is really interesting. It's a band, you got to remember these guys. Some people probably won't, but it's a band called Primitive Radio Gods with their song Standing Outside a Broken Phone Booth with Money in My Hand. Primitive Radio Gods was the stage name of a single musician, Chris O'Connor. Similar to the first Foo Fighters album where Dave Grohl recorded 98% of the record on his own, but wanted to have the appearance of being in a band, right? Chris O'Connor, for his part, never aspired to be famous at all. That's the only explanation I can think of what went down when he scored a #1 hit on the modern rock charts. Now, prior to his record deal and this hit, O'Connor, he was way off the map. He spent the 80s and early 90s playing with the Irels. It's an indie band based in Santa Monica. They released 4 independent discs before breaking up in obscurity.
In Babylon, I found her there.
And after that, Chris isolated himself at his friend's garage with a Tascam 388 and learning how to use a sampling keyboard. So there's that. Now, the result was good. It was the album Rocket, which he virtually solo created. He did the writing, he did the producing, the playing, everything. He even mixed each track. But when it was finished, there was no interest in it. So he just moved on and landed a job as an air traffic controller at LAX. Interesting. But in 1994, Chris decided to give it another shot. So he made 500 CDs and he sent them out to radio stations and small labels. One ended up with a guy named Jonathan Daniel, an A&R rep who knew right away that Phone Booth was a special song. He presented it to Columbia Records, who signed O'Connor under the name Primitive Radio Gods. And just like that, overnight, a 5-year-old song became an alternative rock smash. This song was so big. Now, this is thanks in large part to its appearance in The Cable Guy with Jim Carrey, if you remember that movie. But Standing Outside a Broken Phone Booth with Money in My Hand, a very long title indeed, I might add. Sounded like nothing else playing on radio in 1996. Lo-fi samples, church bells, analog synthesizers, and a chopped B.B. King hook. It was at the same time new and old. The song never hit the Hot 100 because it just was never made as a mainstream single. but it did peak at number 10 on the Airplay chart, and went to number 7 in the Billboard Top 40. And as I mentioned before, it was number 1 on the mainstream rock charts and the modern rock charts. So it was a smash. It was all over the place. So I guess the question is, what do you do after scoring a number 1 hit on your first try? Most musicians would be psyched and ready to take things to the next level. But Chris O'Connor took a sharp left turn. His follow-up single had a 0% chance of having any commercial success, and O'Connor knew it. The reason is, the second single was named Mother Blankety Blank. Not exactly a radio-friendly title. The name alone guaranteed 0 radio spin, 0 MTV rotation, and 0 shot at financial success. Again, this was 96. Lyrically, the song only used the F-bomb a couple times, but in terms of subject matter, it was a furious anti-establishment rant. Not exactly made for appealing to the masses, and the worst part is, he did it on purpose. The follow-up single was a deliberate shunning of the spotlight for sure here. Total self-sabotage. There were other signs that it was no accident, though. Unsurprisingly, Columbia Records pushed for a different single, but O'Connor insisted that Mother Blanker had to be the official follow-up, uncensored. In a media landscape terrified of FCCC fines and moral outrage, really, the song was doomed from the start. I mean, the message was loud and clear. I don't want your fame. And you know what? It worked perfectly. Primitive Radio Gods never scored another charting single and soon after faded into obscurity. I mean, in an interview years later, Chris O'Connor called his fleeting experience with superstardom music industry, I can't say the word on here, RAPE. Music industry RAPE. And he claimed in response that he burned all bridges in relationships. O'Connor continued making music his own way, recording more albums and EPs in the shadows. No hype, no touring, no comeback. That's just the way he wanted it. Cool. Let me mention today's sponsor. You know, what if you could delay your next 2 mortgage payments? I mean, how great would that be? Imagine putting those 2 payments into your pocket and finally getting a little financial break. Now, this is all possible when you call American Financing today. I mean, most Americans are putting everyday expenses like gas, groceries, and other bills on credit cards. Once that debt piles up, there doesn't seem to be a way out. American Financing can show you how to use your home's equity to pay off that debt. Call American Financing before you get to a point where you simply can't make those payments. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are helping homeowners just like you restructure loans and consolidate debt, all without any upfront fees. Customers of American Financing are saving an average of $800 a month. That's like a $10,000 raise. It's a fast, simple process that could really save your budget this summer. Call before you fall into that hole. 866-890-4844. That's 866-890-4844. Or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Professor of Rock. Coming in at number 4, I've got an artist that probably wouldn't be featured on this channel under any other circumstance, really. Stanley Kirk Burrell, a.k.a. MC Hammer.
Can't touch this. You can't touch this.
This one's actually more than just one bad decision that killed a career. It's more like a laundry list that he checked off. So in 1990, MC Hammer was on top of the music world, right? Powered by the mega hit, You Can't Touch This. His album, Please Hammer, Don't Hurt Him. I mean, that thing sold over 18 million copies worldwide, making him the first hip-hop artist to go diamond. Actually, You Can't Touch This wasn't even its biggest hit. It actually peaked at number 8. It's the most memorable from the album for sure. But his next 2 singles, Have You Seen Her, a remake, and Pray, they went to number 4 and number 2 respectively.
So let me know. Have you seen her? Have you seen her? And on my knees every night I'm still gonna pray.
With flashy dance moves, oversized parachute pants that everybody was wearing back then, and that larger-than-life stage presence, MC Hammer became a pop culture phenomenon for a couple of years. I mean, think about it. At his peak, he was earning $30 million a year. $30 million! From records and tours and merch and endorsements. He even had his own Saturday morning cartoon, Hammerman. I mean, everybody remembers that one.
Hammerman! Hammerman! Hammerman!
But Hammer's huge commercial appeal sparked a backlash in the shifting hip-hop landscape where he was accused of selling out for his pop-friendly sound. And it's true, I mean, he had a pop-friendly sound. Everybody had this album. I mean, it sold 18 million copies Many of you listening to this probably won't admit that you had it, and I have a hard time admitting it. I got it for my birthday from my parents one year. I think my mom bought it. My dad knew I wasn't into this kind of music. I wasn't into it. I may have listened to it a few times. All right, I listened to it.
We got to pray just to make it today.
I mean, who hasn't sung along to "You Got to Pray Just to Make It Today"? And it helped, that it had the sample from Prince's "When Doves Cry," and he, of course, sampled a lot of people. But again, after getting criticized for selling out, Hammer attempted to regain credibility, so he dropped the MC from his name, and he released Too Legit to Quit. Too Legit to Quit. I can't remember the thing.
Get ready, because this is it. Your crew is through, and we too legit to quit shining.
That was in 91. The album went triple platinum, spawned the hit title track, but he couldn't match the frenzy of his debut. By 92, overexposure had set in. For his 94 album, The Funky Headhunter, Hammer leaned on harder beats and tried to reinvent himself with a tougher image there. Crazy enough, this record actually went platinum, but many fans saw this sudden turn as inauthentic, especially after the awkward Pumps and a Bump video, which MTV banned from daytime rotation. Hammer's decline accelerated with 1995's Inside Out, which was a new Jack Swing influence album that peaked at just 119 on the Billboard 200. This led Giant Records to drop him. Now, he looked for a career boost by signing to Death Row Records, working on an album titled Too Tight, and he was collaborating with Tupac Shakur. But Tupac's 1996 killing and chaos at Death Row prompted Hammer to walk away from this. He actually returned to his spiritual roots with 1998's Family Affair. It was a faith-focused double album released on EMI. And now he was an ordained minister, and he promoted on Christian TV. And it sold 1,000 copies worldwide. 1,000 copies. Staggering drop from the 18 million Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him moved earlier in the decade. It's crazy. Now, a major factor in Hammer's downfall was financial mismanagement. At his peak, he built a 40,000 square foot mansion with gold-plated gates and a recording studio and a pool that I guess cost $500,000 a year just to maintain. He actually employed like 200 people and spent lavishly in cars and jewelry and private jets and his entourage. And then sales tanked and his expenses became unsustainable. By 96, Hammer was $13 million in debt and he filed for bankruptcy. He would later admit that his priorities were out of order, way out of order. He had too much money and not enough sense, his words. His spectacular rise and fall became a pop culture cautionary tale about fame and excess, but he emerged from the 90s with a new purpose, no longer chasing hits, but life lessons. So there's that. Coming in at number 3, I've got the renegade hitmakers, the KLF, a chaos cloaked duo who stormed the charts to become the biggest selling singles act on the planet in 1991, only to torch their own success in a ritualistic, career-ending spectacle. All right, so our story starts in the late 80s where Bill Drummond and Jimmy Cauty first joined forces as the Justified Ancients of Moo Moo, or the Jams. And their early pop experiments, they lifted chunks from Beatles and Samantha Fox, even ABBA. Now, when ABBA's lawyers came calling over an unauthorized sample, the Jam drove to Sweden, and upon failing to meet, the band burned piles of their outlawed records in a field. Reinvention came next. These guys were crazy. This is funny. They took the alias, the Time Lords, and set out to hijack the UK pop charts. In 1988, they released Doctor and the TARDIS, a mashup of the Doctor Who theme and glam rock riffs. It hit number 1 in the UK and it sold over 1 million copies and crowned the duo as novelty kings. But they weren't done yet. Next, they emerged as the KLF, short for Copyright Liberation Front. Their underground club cut What Time Is Love crash into the UK top 5 in 1990.
Just remember, what time is love?
And then came the big one, January 1991's 3 AM Eternal. That shot to number 1 in the UK and cracked the US top 5. Most people don't realize this, but by the end of that year, they had outsold every other singles act on earth. They beat out Michael Jackson, even Nirvana. The KLF kept the fire going with Last Train to Trans Central and their chart-climbing album, The White Room. And then in a move that nobody saw coming, they teamed up with country legend Tammy Wynette for the twangy techno twang oddity Justified and Ancient, maybe one of the strangest songs of the last 30 years or so.
They're justified and they're ancient.
It went top 10 in the US, it hit number 2 in the UK, and it reached number 1 in several countries. They were an international sensation. And that's when they decided to blow it all up and just walk away. So let me set the scene here. It was February 1992, the Brit Awards. The KLF hit the stage with grindcore band Extreme Noise Terror. They did a blistering, largely incoherent version of 3 AM Eternal. Largely incoherent. Strobe lights flashed and Drummond hobbled out in a kilt, cigar in his mouth, and he brandished an automatic weapon loaded with blanks. And he fired over the stunned crowd. Then came the chilling announcement. The KLF have now left the music business. And later that night, they dumped a dead sheep at the after party with a note reading, "I died for you, bon appetit." The fallout was instant. Within weeks, the KLF confirmed their retirement and deleted their entire back catalog, making their music nearly impossible to buy. They deleted their entire back catalog. It's crazy. Their Brit Award trophy was later found buried near Stonehenge, an unmarked grave for their own stardom, I guess. So in one night, they went from global dominators to music's ultimate vanishing act. Drummond and Cotty resurfaced only in fleeting, often cryptic art projects, including burying £1 million in cash on a Scottish island in 1994. They never returned to the charts, but their influence, it only deepened. From The Prodigy to Daft Punk, many artists have cited the KLF's fearless mashups and self-destructing stardom as a true inspiration. Decades later, their catalog remains largely unavailable, adding to their mystique as a band. And walking away at their peak, the KLF locked in their place as pop culture's ultimate pranksters. Telling you. At number 2, the bridesmaid position, I'm going with somebody who was made for the bridesmaid position. I gotta go with the dramatic fall of one Terence Trent D'Arby.
Wish me love or wishing well to kiss and tell.
When introducing The Hardline, according to Terence Trent D'Arby, was released in 1987, it felt like the arrival of a fully formed star. Wishing Well, with his hypnotic groove and enigmatic lyrics, it became his breakout single, topping the Hot 100 and climbing high on charts worldwide.
Wishing well, crocodile should say.
Hardline, it also released the top 30 single Dance Little Sister, and then the number 4 hit Sign Your Name, great song.
Sign your name across my heart.
It was on its way to going double platinum in the US. Just a matter of months, Terence Trent D'Arby went from promising newcomer to global sensation. He had a great future ahead of him. But in the flush of that early success, D'Arby gave an interview that would haunt his public image forever. Speaking to the British music magazine Melody Maker in 1987, he proclaimed, "My first album is better than Sgt. Pepper. I'm a genius, a complete genius." Problem is, it wasn't a one-off remark. D'Arby doubled down in other interviews soon after, framing himself as the future of pop and the savior of soul. The reaction from his now infamous statements came swiftly, especially in the UK. I mean, declaring his debut better than Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? That wasn't just bold, it was sacrilege. Music journalists who had championed his fresh sound and genre-bending style, they turned on him overnight. Just like that, his career was DOA.
Hugging like a monkey see, monkey do.
I mean, his self-proclaimed genius overshadowed the music altogether. British tabloids pounced, as they are wont to do. They painted D'Arby as a naive American upstart who didn't grasp the cultural weight of what he was saying, and I don't think he did. In the context of 80s Britain, I mean, the Beatles were more than just a band, they were an untouchable institution. D'Arby's comments were read not just as arrogance, but as pop heresy. In the United States, the whispers, they followed him across the Atlantic immediately. Even as Wishing Well rocketed up the Hot 100, radio programmers and DJs began to handle him with caution. Terence Trent D'Arby's public persona was beginning to cost him royally. Interviews grew more combative, with reporters less interested in his music, and they were focused more on goading him into another outrageous quote that they could print. The narrative had definitely shifted. from his music to his mouth. To his credit, though, D'Arby tried to course correct. As the backlash grew, he walked back some of his comments. He chalked much of it up to misunderstanding, claiming he was performing a character, one that he exaggerated for just some attention. He said, "I was just joking." He said, "I was mocking the whole idea of pop egotism."
Through my veins, quickly.
But behind the scenes, his publicist scrambled to salvage his image. But D'Arby, his unpredictability, it just didn't help matters at all. One moment he'd praise the Beatles' artistry, the next he'd say their influence was overstated. This did little to ease the public perception that he was cocky, that he was arrogant. Fans were left wondering if they had bought into a genuine artist or genuine artistry, or just another overinflated hype machine that was grown by the labels. Even the labels grew nervous. Interview requests slowed. No matter how catchy his singles, the arrogance narrative, that was the driver's seat for him.
Her machine wear a butterfly tail.
The fallout from D'Arby's comments lingered well beyond his debut. By the time he released his follow-up album, Neither Fish Nor Flesh, in 1989, any goodwill was gone. Critics were ready with sharpened knives, and radio programmers weren't eager to give him spins at all. The album topped out at number 61 on the Billboard 200 and failed to certify even gold in the US. It was a devastating drop from his multi-platinum debut. It produced 2 singles, This Side of Love and To Know Someone Deeply is to Know Someone Softly. Neither of those made even the top 100. It's just crazy. Couldn't even make it on the Hot 100. Once hailed as a boundary-pushing star, Terence Trent D'Arby's career, it was in freefall. Since then, Terence has released an additional 11 albums. None of them have charted well. Same with his singles. Commercially, Terence Trent D'Arby just fell off the map altogether. And the sad irony here is that Introducing the Hardline was an incredible album. It was one of the best debuts of the 80s. It had flair, it had hooks. But by inviting comparisons to the most revered works in pop history, D'Arby forced critics and listeners to judge him against impossible standards. And he couldn't live up to that. I mean, who could? Instead of being remembered as a gifted artist with a killer debut, he became little more than a musical footnote. And it was all kind of his fault. Okay, so here we are at number 1. And for this one, I got another Beatles connection. I've got the Knack, who are called the second coming of the Beatles, but they didn't quite live up to the hype. All right, so let me set the stage. In the summer of '79, the Knack surged from LA nobodies to the trendy chart toppers virtually overnight. I mean, their debut single, My Sharona, exploded out of every radio, and it became a monster hit. The group, led by lead singer Doug Fieger, immediately found themselves hailed as rock's next sensation, the next Beatles. Their label, Capitol Records, leaned hard into the moment, touting the Knack as the future of pop and rock. The group's debut album, Get the Knack, it flew off shelves, riding the momentum of My Sharona to multi-platinum status and a huge future ahead of them. Critics, DJs, fans, they all initially embraced their stripped-down power pop and tight hooks. I mean, for a moment, the Knack were everywhere, and they seemed like they could be one of the biggest bands. But even as they rode high on the charts, a storm was brewing. Their sudden success, their cocky image, and their relentless exposure triggered a backlash that hit just as fast and just as hard. Much of the early criticism centered on the band's packaging and promotion. Capitol Records, which had once introduced the Beatles to American audiences, stamped the Knack's records with that old 60s Capitol rainbow label. The album cover for Get the Knack mimicked Meet the Beatles in its stark black and white simplicity as well. The press started noticing immediately. Rolling Stone and other outlets began calling them the Baby Beatles. What had been intended as a tongue-in-cheek tribute was seen as delusional self-comparison. To critics, it looked like total arrogance. Doug Fieger and the band insisted the visual nods were just a joke, an ironic commentary on the music industry hype machine. But nobody seemed to be laughing at this joke. As the band's profile soared, the media's goodwill evaporated completely. But the Beatles comparison, they weren't the only reason. Making matters worse, the Knack's management enforced a no interviews policy at the peak of their popularity. This idea was to, cultivate a mystique. a move possibly inspired by early Beatles media strategy. But here it completely backfired. Reporters who had championed the band, they felt snubbed. Without access, they turned hostile. Figer's cocky stage persona and sarcastic interviews were recast as arrogance, feeding the narrative that the Knack were just full of themselves. As scrutiny intensified here, critics found more ammunition, and they found it in the band's lyrics.
Such a dirty man, I always get it up for the touch of the other kind.
Songs like Good Girls Don't and She's So Selfish, they were filled with teen lust and innuendo. While Figer defended the songs as expressions of adolescent angst, others, they pegged them as crass and sexist.
It's a teenage sadness everyone has got to tell you. It's just me, she's so.
The band's second album, titled But the Little Girls Understand, that only made things worse, right? Feminist critics and cultural commentators accused the Knack of reinforcing outdated misogynistic tropes. All these missteps came together in a bizarre but telling moment. Nuke the Knack, with a K. Fed up with the band's overexposure, a San Francisco artist named Hugh Brown launched the Nuke the Knack campaign. Do you remember this? Said Brown about it, "They were so overhyped I thought I'd do something that's kind of obnoxious and kind of funny at the same time." Brown began printing t-shirts emblazoned with Nuke the Knack, and it quickly became a national trend. People started buying them like crazy. Nuke the Knack buttons, there were bumper stickers, there were shirts everywhere. This was a campaign. A grassroots campaign that went crazy. First, the band laughed along. They were even spotted wearing some of the t-shirts, but the joke was clearly on them. By 1980, the backlash had taken its toll. The band's second album failed to live up to expectations at all, and the single struggled mightily. Once marketed as the second coming of the Beatles, the Knack now looked like a flash in the pan. I mean, their third album barely registered, and the group disbanded soon after that. In just over 2 years, they'd gone from the top of the charts to a total cautionary tale. Brutal. Well, there you have it. 6 biggest career killers in history. Man, some really bad, boneheaded decisions here, but some I understand. Let's have a great discussion about this. I want to hear your comments. What are your memories of these bands and these songs? Do you remember Nuke the Knack? What do you think about the Alan Parsons Project? Should they be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I say they should. I just think they could have been one of the biggest bands ever. Again, let's have a spirited conversation below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.